Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I am here with the Yamaha XR900, and I wanted to talk about the idea of whether neo-retro bikes really deserve the premium price tag they so often demand. And I guess my easy answer to that question is yes, because I do think that we can justify somewhat of a price increase over the more typical naked bikes that we often see these based on, simply because they've taken most of the plastics off, which are, cheap to make. They're very easy to style a bike around, that kind of thing. And certainly most of the naked bikes, particularly with a lot of plastic on them, they tend to be quite polarizing as to whether people like them or not. I think the styling on the neo-retro bikes in comparison, because it does hark back to a simpler time in motorcycling, and often we see, the single round headlights, the more elegant lines, the bike's cleaned up a little bit more nicely into how things are hidden away and the overall details of the bike. I do think there's a lot of appeal to these bikes, and there's some jokes to be made about hipsters liking this style of bike and certainly paying more for them, as well as for them being somewhat of a dad bike, where we're talking about those older riders who've got a bit more money to spend. And certainly it does mean that perhaps the segment isn't quite as competitive as it could be, because those people are willing to spend a little bit more, particularly for a bike which probably reminds them of riding 20, 25, 30 years ago, as far as the look of the bike, while still offering a thoroughly modern machine. So you're not having to go back 30 or 40 or 50 years to some old dinosaur, which you remember being awesome, but probably by today's standards is fairly mediocre. Instead, you're getting these bikes which look the part to an extent, and certainly on various neo-retro machines, I've had people come up and say, "Oh, is that an old bike?" And I go, no, it's a new one, which is quite a nice experience to have if you're the owner of the bike. Obviously, I'm normally borrowing them, so it's a bit of a compliment that I can't take too much credit for, but it does speak to how well a lot of the brands are doing in making these bikes look really cool and just being a popular machine. So when we look at the XR900, the features that stand out are, of course, single headlight. It's got a nice round dash, which again, that's not something that we really see with the TFTs, which is why it's got an LCD dash. Simple mirrors, blacked out controls and bars, which does bring the whole look of the bike together, and the headlight mount is built into the fork upper there. So there's a lot of nice little details which do stand out. The saddle as well, it's got this leather style seat on it with two-tone kind of design to it, which again, that really stands out. Round tail light, another feature which stands out. The upgrade to this bike has added the LED indicators. I'm not a huge fan of that radiator cover there, because I feel like being raw plastic is not my favorite feature on this kind of style bike, where in comparison, this feature here works perfectly. This feature again, really nicely done. It suits the style of the bike. The exposed frame on the back of the bike, again, really nice features which just work with this particular machine. And there are little details, like the exhaust on this is rounder and less angular than on the MT-07. If we're looking at some of the bigger bikes, like for instance the XR900, which is the obvious step up from this bike, you're getting a much more advanced package, which again carries a premium over the MT-09. But while I haven't ridden that bike, I have no doubt, based on my previous experiences riding the XSR900s, I think that's going to be easy to justify. And that was certainly the case for me comparing the Z900 with the Z900RS, where the Z900RS carries quite a significant premium, but what they've done to that bike just makes that neo-retro version stand out in a way which it has an enormous appeal to me personally, which is subjective, where the Z900, the more plasticky style, and certainly kind of a slightly more aggressive ergo and feeling a little bit more compact and stuff like that, actually worked against it in my mind.
So as a quick rundown, the Yamaha XSR900 is the big daddy of the XSR700, running the new, larger triple-cylinder engine, pumping out almost 120 horsepower and the latest electronics package in a stylish package with a bit of a bubble butt in the latest iteration. It's just that seat. You do get adjustable suspension, higher end brakes including Brembo radial master cylinder, Spin-forged wheels, TFT display, modes, lean-sensitive traction control and ABS, lift control, slide control, cruise control, a quick shift, and slip assist clutch. The look is more refined than the standard MT-09, probably leaning more towards the modern than the retro in some ways, although I reckon I like the look of this version even more than the older one before they updated the engine and of course the styling. The premium over the MT-09 is about $2,600 here in Australia, with the bikes cutting two very distinct figures, despite sharing so many of those features. I think back in the day, the earlier XSR900 model may have actually got the adjustable fork prior to the MT-09, which did at the time help justify the price difference. However, that's no longer the case. Now, Kawasaki Z900RS is a very different beast. They went all out on the classic styling and nailed it with particular attention to the engine and exhaust. I may be a little biased as I love that bike, but I'd say it's one of the most eye-catching Neo retros that almost doesn't need the Neo moniker, at least from a styling perspective. Granted, it's a lot more suave than the bikes it took styling cues from. Where the standard Z900 offered exceptional value, it was the Z900RS that caught my attention when I got to test ride one, with a beautiful 4-cylinder engine, strong electronics package, and just being a great thing to ride. You do pay a significant premium for the RS though, with the Kawasaki site currently down, so I can't check the exact difference. But that's an additional cost I'd happily wear for this stunner, with the devil in the detail and being really felt on this bike. Now obviously if you want value for money and like Kawasaki's modern transformer-like styling, the Z900 remains an absolute steal. On a bit of a tangent, after recently having tested the Hornet CB750 from Honda, I'll also be keeping an eye out for if they do a Neo Retro option. The modern naked bike version is a weapon and exceptional value as well, with a Neo Retro likely to expand that appeal to a more classically inclined rider, or perhaps in line with their CBR range, which is the Neo Retro options, but of course if that comes to fruition, we'd expect to see a higher price to match as well.
So I guess the question is, can we justify the Neo Retro Premium? And that's just going to come down to the rider, what you like, what you believe is value on a bike and what features you value. And if you're not a fan, you've always got the option of buying the base naked bike model. I think that's a great thing for riders. And if you are willing to spend that little bit more, you got these great Neo Retro options, which take the styling in a different direction and I think are pretty suave. Anyway, the XSR700 is certainly kind of one of the more forgotten machines, I would say, in the Neo Retro range. A lot of people don't even realize these bikes exist and have never seen one in person, and can be quite impressed when they see one, because I do think the styling is a real standout, and that's been the case for a number of years. But there are some small upgrades on the latest model, which, particularly with the headlight, brings it more into that real Neo Retro style, where it did used to have the old halogen headlight, which really dated the bike. And of course it didn't have the LED indicators. So overall, I'm really impressed with the XSR700. Check out my full review if you want a bit of an idea about how the bike rides and my overall impressions on that side of things. Let me know your thoughts. Neo Retro, naked bike, or is there a different type of bike entirely that you're interested in? As always, stay safe out there and thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.